trying to keep up with everything happening globally, especially the stuff hitting trade, the economy. It can feel like you're just drowning in information sometimes. Hard to know what really counts.
It really can be. Yeah, absolutely overwhelming. Trying to cut through all that noise to figure out what's actually going on. That's tough.
And that's exactly what we try to do for you here on the deep dive. We dig into a pile of sources like this time, we've been going through reports on these new U.S. tariffs and pull out the key things, the stuff you need to know, but without the overload.
Yeah, think of it like we're navigating the maze for you, finding that direct path to understanding.
Exactly. So today, we're diving into something pretty major, the shakeup in North American cross-border supply chains. This is all happening because of those new U.S. tariffs on goods coming in from Canada and Mexico. We've looked at reports from people right in the thick of it, logistics folks, industry journals trying to get a solid handle on it.
hmm And our mission today, really, is to unpack that for you. What were the immediate effects? What hurdles are businesses actually facing right now? And what could this mean down the road for how stuff moves across those borders? We want you to walk away with a clearer picture of, well, a pretty complicated situation.
Okay, let's get into it then. The reports we saw painted a picture of, well, some serious activity right before these tariffs kicked in. Sounds like a mad dash to move goods.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Jordan Dewart over at Redwood Logistics, they help companies manage supply chains. He described a real sense of panic down at the U.S.-Mexico border just before that April 2nd date hit. He even called it a crazy rush.
Oh, crazy rush. Wow.
Yeah.
Can you maybe give our listener a bit more detail? What does that physically look like at a border crossing? Longer truck lines, maybe? Different priorities?
It's likely a mix of things. Definitely longer queues, trucks backed up waiting for customs as the sheer volume surges.
Mm.
You might also see companies scrambling, trying to push specific, maybe high-value shipments through first.
Mm.
Probably creates bottlenecks just everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, imagine everyone trying to hit the same highway exit at once. That kind of pressure.
So what was driving that specific urgency? Why the big surge right then?
Well, the big thing was the jump in the tariffs themselves. It used to be something like 51% of Mexican goods and maybe 62% of Canadian goods had U.S. tariffs. But come April 2nd, boom, a flat 25% on almost everything, barring some energy stuff. That's a massive cost increase overnight for a lot of companies.
Huge difference. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Companies trying to beat the clock, get goods in under the wire. DeWart apparently said this rush had been building for weeks, and it mirrored what happened before that earlier March 4th deadline, too.
Exactly right. We saw a similar kind of stockpiling, that surge in shipping, leading up to March 4th. And it's interesting, remember, after the USMCA origin rules exemption came through, things sort of settled back down.
Right, the flow normalized a bit.
Yeah.
Good.
But this time, with these broader tariffs hitting almost everything, it's a different ballgame.
And Dort's looking ahead and seeing potential problems, isn't he?
Yeah.
Mentioned freight maybe just stagnating at the Mexican border.
He did, yeah. He raised that concern.
Mhm.
His point was, if these tariffs stick around for a while, we could be looking at some serious prolonged delays. The issue he flagged is how complex it is, coordinating that north-south traffic.
Yeah.
Making sure you have enough trucks going south to handle the usually much higher volume coming north.
The imbalance.
Exactly. And this sudden tariff situation, all the uncertainty, it's just creating these huge bottlenecks
Mhm.
on both sides, really.
So it's not just the cost of the tariffs, it's the knock-on logistical chaos, too. And Mike Burkhart at C.H. Robinson, they're a huge logistics player. He also flagged some of these issues, didn't he? Especially the uncertainty about what happens next with Mexican goods.
That's a massive piece of this puzzle. The lack of clarity. Will there be adjustments from Mexico? When do those USMCA exemptions actually run out? What's the timeline for these threatened auto parts tariffs? Businesses are trying to plan in this fog of uncertainty. It's incredibly difficult.
You can't plan effectively like that.
Not really. And C.H. Robinson is apparently seeing the strain already with their Mexican trucking partners.
How so?
Well, Burkhart said Mexican trucking capacity is already tight because clients were doing exactly what you'd expect, stockpiling goods before the tariffs hit. So that preemptive action just ripples through the network, makes it harder, probably pricier, to get a truck when you need one.
Right, right. And this whole wait and see thing Dort mentioned, where companies are just letting inventory pile up near the border or even further inland, that can't last forever, can it?
No, it's definitely not sustainable long term. Dort made the point that for a lot of smaller or medium-sized businesses, just sitting on piles of inventory isn't really an option financially. If they have to eat that full 25% tariff cost, He fears their whole business model might just break.
And it's not just the little guys feeling it. Paul Brashear at IS Logistics, another big name, he confirmed this is having a major impact, his words, across the whole North American supply chain.
Absolutely. Brashear pointed out that a whole bunch of projects involving trade between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada are basically on ice right now because of all this. He even used the phrase full supply chain restructuring, suggests companies might need to fundamentally rethink things.
Full supply chain restructuring. That
Yeah.
sounds drastic. For you listening, that's not just tweaking things. That could mean companies seriously looking at sourcing from totally different countries, or maybe changing how they make things entirely. Where might we see that first? What kind of industries?
You'd likely see it fastest in industries with really thin margins or those that move huge volumes across the borders. So
Yeah.
think automotive parts, definitely. Consumer electronics, maybe. Even certain foods and agricultural goods. Companies there might have to quickly look at, finding suppliers elsewhere or maybe even moving production, if possible, to places not hit by these tariffs.
Wow. And this disruption is even messing with how companies normally handle their annual logistics contracts.
It really is. Typically this time of year, they'd be locking in those big annual contracts for moving freight. But Brashear says that's getting pushed aside. Instead, everyone's scrambling, doing urgent redesigns for Q2 routes, trying to reprice deals, doing these mini bids, he called them, just to secure trucks now in this crazy market.
Sounds like pure chaos for planners. And IDEF Logistics is even having to, actively manage traffic going south just to make sure they have trucks coming north.
Precisely. Brashear talked about that. They're putting extra effort into securing southbound capacity. Because, like we said, there's that natural imbalance. Usually about 4 times more stuff moves north into the U.S. So to guarantee they have trucks for those crucial northbound loads, they need to make the southbound trip attractive for carriers, too.
It's interesting, though, you mentioned this pre-tariff shipping frenzy, but Brashear also said the overall U.S. freight market is still kind of weak.
That's a really important nuance. Brashear was clear. Yeah, there was that temporary spike before April 2nd. But the basic underlying demand for trucking in the U.S. hasn't suddenly shot up. What has changed is the direction and the urgency of the freight flow. This focus on imports is creating a ton of work, forcing carriers to completely rethink how they dispatch, even if technically there are enough trucks overall.
Gotcha. So the system has capacity, but it's stressed in specific ways. And we are seeing specific impacts, like with flatbed trucks.
Yes, definitely seeing that. Seems the tariffs lit a fire under demand for U.S. flatbeds. Probably tied to things like steel, maybe lumber, stuff often moved on flatbeds that are now facing these tariffs. That extra demand means more loads popping up on the spot market, for immediate transport needs. And surprise, surprise, the spot rates for flatbeds are climbing.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit north. What about the U.S.-Canada border? Sounds like similar capacity issues are cropping up there, too.
Very similar story, yes. Mike Burkhart at C.H. Robinson mentioned that trucking capacity on the U.S.-Canada border is also getting really strained. And again, he points the finger at the tariff uncertainty. It's apparently making Canadian trucking companies hesitant, maybe less willing to commit their trucks to those cross-border runs.
So maybe some carriers get a short-term boost from higher spot prices, but the long view looks shaky.
That seems to be the worry. Burkhart kind of hinted at that. Disrupting these established long-term trade flows, it might lead some carriers to actually scale back on those routes eventually. Yeah, spot rates might be up for a bit, but that kind of instability isn't great for running a business long-term.
And we actually have some numbers on how much those spot rates have jumped, right?
We do. The reports mentioned pretty steep increases on Canada to U.S. routes this year. Some lanes apparently up like 75% since January. And DAT Freight data show the average spot rate for a standard dry van truck, say Toronto to Chicago, hit $1.81 a line a mile. And that's without fuel, in early April. Yeah, that was up 12% just from March and a big 25% jump since the start of the year.
Okay, $1.81 per mile. That's a serious hike. What about the other way? U.S. into Canada, Chicago to Toronto, for instance.
That's interesting. That lane actually saw rates go up earlier, peaking around $2.01 a mile back in March. But then by early April, they'd actually dropped back down to $1.71.
Ah,
It'd probably reflect that imbalance again, right?
yeah.
More demand, more competition for those northbound loads heading into the U.S.
Makes sense. And it isn't just tariff squeezing capacity, is it? You mentioned rail issues, too, especially in Canada.
That's another layer, yes. Burkhart highlighted that. Apparently, there's been some bad rail congestion recently, and that's making the existing shortage of long-haul capacity within Canada even worse. So you've got shippers who might normally use rail, but they're facing port backlogs, rail delays.
So they switched to trucks.
Exactly. They shift more freight over to trunking, which just puts even more pressure on truck capacity that's already tight and pushes those truckload rates up even further.
Man, it's like a perfect storm of factors hitting logistics right now. But Paul Brashear did offer a slightly different take on where rates might go next.
He did, yeah. A bit of perspective, maybe. He suggested this upward pressure on rates might not last forever. His thinking is, well, if consumer demand starts to cool off a bit because of the tariffs making things more expensive,
Right, the impact hits consumers.
then we could see rates start to come back down, kind of like how things fluctuate with, say, seasonal produce harvests. Rates spike, then they settle. He thinks that might happen here, at least until companies fully adjust their inventories or figure out new ways to source their goods.
Okay, so wrapping this all up for you, our listener, it's clear these new tariffs aren't just some abstract policy thing. They are actively, right now, changing how goods move across North America.
Yeah.
We're seeing these immediate logistical nightmares, borders jammed, trucks scarce, and it's forcing businesses into some really tough decisions about their whole setup.
Exactly. And it just hammers home how interconnected everything is in the supply chain. You tweak one thing, like tariffs, and the ripples spread everywhere. Trucking costs, border weights, even how companies negotiate contracts for the year ahead.
So it leaves us with a pretty big question to think about, doesn't it? Given all these immediate shocks we're seeing, what could the longer-term fallout be for manufacturing here in North America, for the prices, that you pay for things, and for the future of these really critical trade relationships between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico? It's definitely something to watch how businesses, and frankly all of us, might have to adapt in the coming months and maybe even years.